How's everyone doing today? This does not sound like a crowd that just had lunch. Are you guys sure you guys had lunch? How's everyone doing today? Yeah? Thanks, guys. My name is Rahel, and today I'll be talking about building products for a global audience. Growth is key for an organization to thrive. So if globalization is inevitable, then you're at the right place. Now, who am I to be speaking about this? I've been blessed to have a global career that's brought me from Indonesia, Singapore, to now Germany. At CodeFox, we built custom mobile and web applications for clients in North America and Southeast Asia. At Glints, we built a job marketplace and career development platform and SaaS productivity tools for users in Southeast Asia and Taiwan. And currently at Delivery Hero, I'm building an account management interface that is available in 70+ countries around the world. Now, throughout this presentation, I'll be referring to a globally distributed company where there's a central team that has regional teams that support us when it comes to product launches. But the product development itself happens within a central team. Throughout the presentation, I'll walk you through common challenges throughout our discovery and delivery loops. So I'm sure the engineers in this room are very well versed in the delivery loop. But on the discovery loop, we have these 4 stages here that I'll be walking you through. I am a product manager, and I tend to have my engineers invest 10 to 20% of their time with me in the discovery loop. So that means they're with me in some of our user interviews, they're with me in our prototyping sessions, ideation sessions. And I do that because when the engineers get to hear themselves what the users are going through, they tend to be able to give creative solutions. They're able to give input from the engineering side that is relevant to the problem that we're trying to solve. And lastly, they have high ownership towards building the solution because they're also not just understanding what the users are going through, but they were also there when we're doing the prototyping and brainstorming sessions. So the discovery loop starts with problem discovery. During problem discovery, we discover problems that hinders the business or the users from achieving their goals. And then during problem validation, we validate whether this problem is actually a real problem, and this is where we also figure out how big the problem is. Next, during solution discovery, we brainstorm ideas that could potentially solve the problem. And lastly, in the discovery phase, there's solution validation, where we make sure that the idea that we have truly fits with the business workflow, has true user value, is usable by the users, and is feasible. In the delivery loop, of course, once you know that the solution has been validated, we continue to design the solution, build the design, and launch the solution. Then, of course, we iterate, and to improve the product, we do further problem discovery, and then the loop continues. And as you know, discovery and delivery loops happen concurrently in a sprint. So during problem discovery, here are some of the issues I encounter. And working for a global company, I have stakeholders all over the place. There's so many of them. They reach out to me all around the clock. And in this case, what has helped me the most is to have a stakeholder map. In this stakeholder map, I tend to see the level of interest and influence that they have. The stakeholders with high interest and high influence, I tend to be more aggressive when it comes to informing them of product updates, and I involve them when it comes to prototyping and brainstorming sessions. Not all the time, but I try to make sure that I truly understand the problems that they're facing and the kind of ideas that they have. The stakeholders with lower interest and influence, I'd have a centralized service desk where they can create tickets on the problems that they're facing, ideas that they have, and the impact that it may have if we solve for the problem that they have. It's also important to be transparent about our priorities, because there's always a lot of items in our backlog, and we tend to rank the items in our backlog using this equation. So we would first figure out the reach score from 1 to 5, the impact score from 1 to 5, and then multiply that by the confidence score from 1 to 5, and divide that by the effort score from 1 to 5. Now, the 1 to 5 is a very subjective thing, and we usually have a ticket with as a benchmark. So if this ticket is a 5, then how would we score this ticket in comparison to that ticket that is a 5? So usually by using this equation, you'd have a priority score, and that is what we're transparent with the stakeholders about. And we're also transparent about the roadmap that we have. By being transparent, they know that we truly listen to them, and that the ideas and the problems that they're facing is something that we think about and that we'll work on along the way. Of course, I also work with my product ops team to schedule recurring calls, email updates, new release demos, and quarterly plans with our stakeholders. And do not repeat the same mistake that I did. There was one time when I had to reschedule a call 3 times because I completely forgot that I had stakeholders in Latin America, Europe, and Asia, and they were complaining that our calls were too early. So be mindful of where your stakeholders are. The next issue that I encountered during problem discovery is that I'm very far away from the users. They're very spread apart, and they're very different to each other. Of course, it helps to do market visits, right, where you can physically build relationships with the users, and also when you're physically there, you tend to efficiently learn about their workflows and what's actually happening on the ground. But you don't always have the luxury for that, and especially now with the budget cuts, this is very difficult. So it's been helpful to actually look at the data of similar markets to the market that you're actually analyzing. So similar markets here could mean markets in close proximity of each other, or markets that have similar business flywheel or workflow or business funnel. So I'll give you an example. When I was working for the recruitment tech, I had a goal to increase our in-house recruiter efficiency. This is just a fancy word of saying we want our recruiters to make more placements. And one recruiter should be able to make the most placements that they can, and they should be able to do it quickly. So then I was looking at a market that wasn't performing well, and I was comparing their data against a similar market that was close in proximity and had similar business workflows. And when I was looking at their conversion funnels, I saw something very interesting. As you can see here in business unit A, they had a 2-to-1 ratio, this is just an example, by the way, from interviews to offers. And in business unit B, it was a 10-to-1 ratio. So as you guys can notice, the conversion funnel B, the funnel is very leaky. And so what I did next is I came up with hypotheses on the different levers that would influence the interview to offer conversion. And through my analysis, by just having this quantitative data and then doing some qualitative research to figure out what could be wrong, I noticed that business unit B just had less demand and had more workforce compared to business unit A. So what this means is that the 100 interviews in business unit B were going to less vacancies, and more recruiters were working in those lesser vacancies, and hence why, because the interviews were going for lesser vacancies, they would convert to lesser offers. And so by learning this data, we realized that in order to increase the efficiency of business unit B, we had to increase the number of vacancies that the recruiters were working with and also stop aggressive hiring. On to the next phase in the product cycle, problem validation. The common challenge that I usually face in this stage is not being able to understand the language of my users. And this is really difficult for me because language is a gateway to someone's beliefs, behaviors, attitudes, and feelings. And understanding this is very important when we want to understand the users. So this is where great translators have been key in my discovery process. And let me give you an example of what a great translator sounds like. OK, unfortunately, the audio is not working. There you go.
That's a lot. What's her real name? That's crazy. Her real name is Anka, and that's her nickname?
No, but so her nickname is Yi Yi because she was born on 2011 on the first day of the first month. And 1 in China is Yi, and her nickname is Yi Yi because she was born on January 1st.
Yes, so as you can see on this video, great translators don't just translate word per word, they also give context as to what the user is saying. Now, it took me moving to a country where I can't speak the language of to help me really empathize with people who can't speak English. And so what I try to be mindful of in this phase when I'm trying to get information from users is to just be patient, to not rush them when trying to finish a sentence, and also to confirm my interpretation with them. Next in the product cycle phase is solution discovery. And a common challenge that I face in this phase is trying to map out the existing solutions and local competitors. This is very important because no matter how amazing your product is, if there's existing solutions that already works for your users, it's going to block the adoption for your product. So there's this misconception, especially for in-house tools, where business stakeholders would say, oh, just build it, and then once it's built, we're just going to force our users to use it. And everyone's going to use it because we're going to force it on them. And this is very misleading. The truth of the matter is, when you build a product, even for an in-house tool, it's very important to get the buy-in of your stakeholders, and you would get that buy-in through letting them understand the problem you're trying to solve and the benefits of your product. But it doesn't just stop there. You also have to understand the habits and anxieties of your users. So for example, if your users have the habit of using Google Sheets, no matter how amazing your product is, that product is not going to replace the Google Sheets that they have the habit of using. So in this case, instead of forcing a new solution on them, it would be better to integrate with the solutions that they are already using, or once you make the necessary developments, that you would then disable those redundant solutions so that your users would adopt your solution. And it's also important here to map out not just the local competitors, but the existing solutions that they're using, and also learn what has worked for them and what has not worked for these competitors and existing solutions, so you can double down on what has worked. Lastly, in the discovery phase is the solution validation. So there was a time when I launched an amazing product. It was solving a real problem. We were very confident that the users would adopt it. And then when we looked at the adoption numbers were very low. And that's because we were too focused on testing for one region that the product doesn't actually fit the workflows of the other regions. And so now I've learned that when I'm trying to build something for a global audience, I would map out the user flow from every region, and not just the user flow within the product, but their flow of day to day. So what other tools are they using? Who else are they working with? And once I've mapped that out, I'm able to understand how this solution can fit for multiple regions. And also, instead of forcing one product that fits all, I've learned to design configurations or make the tool as an integration to existing tools that the users use for better adoption rates. Of course, whatever it is that we build, we make sure that it's legal in that region. And lastly, to make sure that there's no data discrepancy. And this is very important when you're building a product that is showing data to the users. So what do I mean by this? You'd be surprised that the same company could have different data sources, different data definitions, and different data queries for the same metric. And when you're trying to build a data product, like let's say a dashboard with data on it, and you're expecting everyone to use that product, but the data is different than the data that they see on their regional dashboards, I'm very certain that those users will not use that product. They will champion the data that they see in their regional dashboards and will lose trust in your product just because they think your product is showing the wrong data. So what I've done when I encounter this is I try to make sure that whatever data that I'm showing on my product, I compare with regional data, make sure that there is less than a 5% discrepancy because, aiming for 0% discrepancy is almost impossible. And once I've understood how big the discrepancy is, where the discrepancy is coming from, I would then design a document with the metric definitions, the metric source, the metric queries, and I would get the buy-in from the regional stakeholders to align their data definitions based on my proposal. Next is design. Now, when it comes to designing a product for a global audience, sometimes translated text may not fit the design. Here's an example of bucket list in Spanish, very long, right? And sometimes when we're designing our solution, we don't think about this, and we tend to have then terrible UIs where the words are squished together and the words are not legible. So while it's too time-consuming to create different designs for different regions, I would suggest just creating one design, and then during QA, make sure that before you launch it to that region, that you're aware of how the text fits into the solution. Next is build. So when we are building for a global audience, we want to hire quickly, and offshoring is usually a very popular solution to this problem. And there's this issue where a lot of the engineers feel like there's a lack of transparency from our offshore teams. And while there's a lot of horror stories around offshoring, I still believe that it could work as long as you do some research and make sure that you hear great word-of-mouth testimonies rather than just listening to their sales reps. Lastly, for the launch phase. So there's been, again, times where we launched something and we realized on our data dashboards that there was low local adoption. Of course, you would investigate, you would do data analysis around, and also user research around why that adoption is very low, but there's ways to prevent this. So for example, when I want to do a launch, I would define the success criteria first and create relevant data dashboards. So in this example that I have here, my success criteria was that we wanted to have an X percentage of our total account managers to be activated on the platform, meaning using the platform at least once, and that they are retained. They continue to be active account managers. And so through having this relevant data dashboard, something that I check regularly, I make sure that the markets or the regions that has low adoption, that we can quickly figure out, do data analysis and do user research to figure out what went wrong and to quickly fix it. Next, to prevent low adoption, is to release in batches. So instead of releasing to everyone in the globe, we do pilot releases, where we release to a group of market leaders or super users first. Market leaders are usually the market players who have either the biggest revenue contributor or have the biggest user base. And I usually tend to want to talk to the influencers of the pilot group because they're usually the more talkative one who can give us the most feedback. And they're also usually the person that the peer group listens to. So if you can win over the influencer of the peer group, it'll be easier to win over that entire group. Next, I also make sure that we gather feedback and iterate. So we would use tools like Hotjar in our consumer products. We would use Qualtrics to get data from our users. And we would, again, have dashboards and Slack alerts in case things go wrong to make sure that we are aware of what our users are doing on our product. And if things go wrong, we can quickly fix it. Next, it's also very helpful to have exciting localized launch campaigns. And so localized is a very fancy word. It doesn't have to be that complicated. Of course, you can make your campaigns very locally nuanced, but it's just very important that at least the content that you're making can be understood by the users. So meaning it's in the language of the target users that you are launching to. And lastly, it's also been really helpful for me to capture the regional aha moment for activation with my product analytics team. So what an aha moment is the activity that correlates the most to activation. So for example, for Facebook, their aha moment was befriending 7 people within 10 days, and that's what helped them grow to 1 billion users very quickly. And for launching in-house tools, I work with my product ops team to gradually limit access to redundant in-house tools, incentivize transition, meaning, for example, we linked adoption to their bonus one time, and that worked on increasing adoption quickly. And lastly, to provide comprehensive training. For my last point on launch, sometimes the issue here is that regional stakeholders do not cooperate with us because we're the central team. We don't really have the authority. Well, we do, but the regional stakeholders also have their people with authority. So sometimes they have different priorities than us. And in this case, I just make sure before the quarter begins, we align our OKRs with them so that it also becomes their goal to help support us launch this product. And lastly, also to give them visuals on how the product will look like and give them an understanding of what problems this solution is going to solve. And when they have an understanding of what our product can do for their business, how it can benefit them, usually they're more inclined to help us out. If there's one thing that you remember from my talk, it's this. When you're building globally for audience in different regions, just make sure that you look through the lens of a local. Make sure that the local users understand what the feature is and it fits into their workflow. And that's all from me today. These are the links if you'd like to connect with me after the conference, and I am happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Thank you so much. Can we get a cheer for Rahel?
Thank you.
Awesome sauce. So we are having a live stream in here, so all our questions are going to be taken from Slido. So if you have any questions in the room, please go to slido.com. The ID you have to enter is --2023, the simple dash, and then breakout 1. I do have a question to start for people who, let me come up on stage so I'm seen on the, so I am seen on the live stream. But the first question that I got is, can you please give us an example or a concrete example of how you chose to pilot a region for launch?
Yes. Thank you, Arjuna, for that question. I will not name names, but there's a market in the Middle East that we chose to launch first to, because one, the market is one of the biggest contributors for the business, has a big user base. They had high interest to help us out, and also the thing with Middle East culture is that it's very top-down, right? So whatever their managers introduce to them, they're more likely to pay attention and to adopt. So that was like one example where that decision helped us launch successfully. Thank you, Arjuna.
Awesome. Are there any more questions in the room? I put up the link so you can scan the QR code and send some to Slido.
Wow, my presentation was that good.
Everyone is completely understanding how to build products for a global audience.
That's great.
I can do one more question to give you all some time to percolate now that I have the link up for you to scan. The other question that I had is, can you please elaborate on how you chose the aha moment to increase adoption?
Sure. Thank you, Arjuna, for that question. Okay, so aha moment, defining the aha moment to help increase activation. So what we would do is we would imagine this ladder of engagement, which is just a fancy word of the different activities that a user can do on our platform. And we would see, okay, which activity shows that the user understands the value of the product. So for example, this is just me thinking out of thin air. Let's say Instagram, let's say our hypothesis is that the value of the product is the user is going to love getting likes from a post that they made, right? And so we want more users to be activated in the sense that we want more users to get more likes on their post. And so once we know that that is our definition of activation, we would then have a list of hypotheses on what the users need to do in order to get to that product value the quickest. So we would have hypotheses like, they would have to post X amount of posts in a given amount of time, or they would have to befriend X amount of people in a given amount of time so that they have people to actually see their content and like it. We would, after we have that list of hypotheses, we would then run experiments where we would see, okay, if we test with this metric, does it correlate the most with them getting their posts liked? And the metric that correlates the most with getting their pictures liked, that's the metric that we would then also optimize in our product journey. So let's say, for example, the metric that correlates the most is having people to see their content. Then we would work with product marketing, and we would design the product in a way so that more people would get exposed to their content, and then the user would get more likes. I hope that's comprehensive.
That was awesome. I have a couple more questions, and please send some more. That's totally great. One that we got was, which products or companies do you think do a good job of designing for a global audience?
I feel like I've used Slack in all of the companies I've worked for. When I was working in South Asia, I was using Slack, and now in Europe, I'm using Slack, and Slack does a pretty good job at making sure that their product works globally and is just very intuitive. So I would give a shout out for Slack.
That's awesome. Personally, I think Netflix works great in each country I've used it in. I don't know if anyone else has used it for another country. I also have friends in other countries, and the originals that they have, that we can watch the same thing everywhere, makes me happy.
Yes, that's right. I agree with that.
Okay, another one came in. What are common challenges or gotchas when porting products globally?
When, sorry?
What are challenges or common gotchas when porting a product to be global?
When launching?
Yeah, from one country to another, so making the product global.
I see. It would be, sorry, I'm just gonna refer to my slides here. Yes, so when a feature or a product is successful for one region and we're trying to expand it, we would just have to make sure that in each of these phases that we are aware of how the users operate in that region. I mean, really, all of the challenges are, the content that I was just explaining earlier. If the person who asked that question is in the room, I'd love to, understand a little bit more about the question, but basically, usually once we have tested it with one region and we want to expand, we would just turn off our feature flag, and then it would, because we would have already done the necessary discovery and made sure that when we are building it, that it would fit the global audience, then it's just as easy as kind of like turning it on for that region.
That's awesome. We have one more, and we have 7 minutes, so we can answer some more if anyone thinks of some. But here, this one says, have you ever had an instance where the culture of a region led to the development of a tailor-made feature? So a new feature coming out because the culture of a region requires it.
Right. It's usually probably like in the content. So there is, some regions where certain content is sensitive. And so when we were building that feature, we really made sure that we worked with like local ambassadors or like local influencers first to make sure that the content that the users are absorbing like fits into their culture and it's appropriate for that region. So sometimes it's not really how the product is designed, but also like what kind of content we show. And yeah, there's also horror stories that is unfortunately probably confidential for me to share, but let's just say it's very important to make sure that your content resonates with the users in that region.
Okay, folks who are in the room, find Rahel later, find a quiet place. She'll tell you the horror stories in private.
Yes.
Okay, those are the questions that I have. Going once, going twice. Thank you so much. Let's give it up for Rahel.
Thank you everyone for having me.